absolutely superb group of storytellers tonight. And without further ado, we'll start with Gary Whitaker, who comes to us from Fort Worth this evening. And we're looking forward to one of his fabulous stories. Gary?
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I've decided to tell a bit of a spook story tonight, a fun one. When 1959, when I was 8 years old, it was late October, and I was laying on the floor of our living room watching the TV. And on the TV that day was my favorite show, Nightmare Theater. Oh, I love Nightmare Theater. It was so much fun. They had all my favorites on there: Frankenstein, the Mummy, Dracula, the werewolf. And I loved watching it. But that day they had on a different show, unlike anything I had ever seen before. It was called Invaders from Mars. Oh, I was shaking in my boots watching this show. Now, the show was about a boy by the name of David. And one night during a storm, he sees a flying saucer land just behind his backyard and disappear beneath the earth. Oh, he thinks he dreamed it or something. The next morning, he tells his father, who's a scientist, all about it. His father finally goes out to explore to see what he thought he had seen. He goes out there by himself and he disappears into a hole in the earth. And when he comes back, he's acting very different. He's acting scary. And when David tries to talk to him, he notices there's a mark on the back of his neck, a little X. And he's almost violent toward David. And then his father takes his mother out there, and she comes back and she's changed. And then he takes neighbors out there and they come back, they're changed. And he realizes the Martians are taking over his family and friends' brains. I fell asleep. I've been gone all week visiting my cousin Johnny, and I was tired. And I fell asleep during the movie. Now, I began dreaming the movie. I was dreaming Invaders from Mars, but somehow or another in my mind, I mixed up the story with Wizard of Oz, and I was melting the Martians with water. So I was just like, going all through this, my mind in my dream. Then I woke up to smell of peanut butter cookies, freshly made. Oh, I love peanut butter cookies. And Mom was calling to me, and she was saying, Gary, you want some peanut butter cookies? They're fresh. And I was like, oh, wait a minute. That ain't right. Mom never gives us peanut butter cookies. She's always baking them for somebody else. She never asked us to come get them. She never shares them with us. We had to steal them. But she was offering them to me. So I got up and I slowly, because I knew something was wrong. I knew there was something terrible happening. I began to wonder, was it the Martians? And as I walked over there, Mom turned around with a small plate full of peanut butter cookies, and they were fresh. Oh, and they smelled so good. And then she handed it to me. And when she turned around, I stood up on my tiptoes as high as I could see if I could see the mark on the back of her neck, but I could not see her neck because of her hair. Spoiled. And then she gave me a glass of milk and told me, go outside and play. So I did. But I backed out of the room, watching everything around me, watching my mother. She was looking at me weirdly. And I watched her as I made it to the door with my back up against the wall, opened the door and slid out the door like it was some kind of worm and disappeared into the backyard. I went out to my swing and devoured my luscious peanut butter cookies and drank my milk. I was swinging back and forth, wondering if my mother was a Martian. But suddenly I heard noises out back. Now, we had a playhouse back there. And beyond the playhouse was a road, and our part of our property sloped down to it. And all our yard was made of sand. I'm not blowing this out of proportion. We literally lived on a sandy beach. I mean, you could dig for feet and you have nothing but sand. And I heard something out there. And I got off the swing and started walking out there. And I saw a hole in the earth just beyond the playhouse. And I walked closer and I heard voices coming from the hole in the earth. And I saw things moving about in there, and they were horrible to look upon. Now I thought to myself, the Martians have invaded. So I ran and got the water hose, turned it on full, sprayed some of it into a bucket, carried the water hose and the bucket all the way out there. It was about 15 yards. Carried it all the way out there, turned on the nozzle, started spraying the hole. I was about 10 feet from it, and they started screaming violently, the monsters. I thought, I'm melting them. And they were screaming, and then their faces shot up. I turned it on full and sprayed them right in the faces. Oh, they screamed and disappeared. I thought, I'm melting them. And then suddenly my water cut off. I looked back, there was Mother. She was standing. She had turned off the water, and she starts walking, and she got her hands on her hip, and she's doing this, and she's saying stuff at me about watching stupid movies and stuff like that. And I look back, and I hear the Martians down there. I see her coming at me. I don't have any choice. I grabbed the bucket, and when she's about 5 feet away from me, I threw the bucket on her and washed her from head to toe. She didn't melt. She grabbed me by the collar and drug me back to the house, told me I was never going to be able to watch Nightmare Theater again, and that I was going to be punished. I was going to have to be restrained from watching TV for 3 weeks, one for each of us, for my brother, for his friend, and for Mom. And I was okay with that because, you see, I was in my room where my monsters were. Frankenstein. Now, I had little 8-inch figurines and posters. Frankenstein, werewolf, and the Mummy, and Dracula. These were my monsters. These were my heroes, and they were our world monsters. And I knew that they would protect me from the invaders from Mars. So I stayed in that room for 3 weeks. Not watching TV, going out and playing. And watching my mom and my dad and my brothers and sisters every time I came out looking for those marks on the necks. And after 3 weeks, I realized that they really weren't Martians. And I never did get to watch Invaders from Mars again. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Gary.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to share.
Great. Next, we have Judi Tarowsky. And Judi, is it true that you're coming to us from West Virginia, or did somebody just pull my leg?
Virginia, I'm not at home at the moment. I'm at Blackwater Falls State Park in Davis, West Virginia, in the Allegheny Highlands, Allegheny Mountains. It's beautiful. The leaves are turning, and we're here at our lodge and having a nice little getaway.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful. I grew up in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and
Okay.
several times on my way various places drove through West Virginia, and it's absolutely beautiful, particularly during this time of the year. The colors are radiant.
Oh, it's
Go ahead, Judi.
okay. It's wonderful. I do have a little story tonight. It's an old one, and this is the way I tell it. Brother Rabbit was walking down the road one very hot summer day when he saw walking toward him but Brother Turtle. "Well, hello there, Brother Turtle," he called out. "I haven't seen you in a long, long time." "No, I guess we haven't seen each other," Brother Turtle said. "Well, I'll tell you what, let's just sit down here beside the road and catch up." And that's what they did. Brother Rabbit and Brother Turtle just sat down beside the road and they began to catch up. Well, after a while, Brother Rabbit sat back and he said, I haven't had any fun in a long, long time. I haven't either, Brother Turtle said. What are we going to do about that? Let me think about that for a minute, Brother Rabbit said. So he sat back and he thought, and he thought, and he thought. Then he said, I've got it. Tomorrow evening, there's going to be a dance at the town hall, and I'd sure like to ask Miss May to go with me. Oh, and I'd like to ask Miss Motes to go with me, Brother Turtle said. But we have a problem, Brother Rabbit said. What's that? Brother Turtle said. Well, I hear tell that Brother Fox, Brother Bear, and Brother Wolf are going to ask those ladies to the dance. And with 3 of them and the 2 of us, well, the odds are not in our favor. What are we going to do about it? Brother Turtle said. Well, let me think about this for a minute, Brother Rabbit said. So he sat back again, and he thought, and he thought, and he thought some more. And finally he said, I've got it. Everybody, we're going to ask everybody to go fishing with us tomorrow afternoon at the mill pond. We're going to go fishing, Brother Turtle said. Absolutely, Brother Rabbit said. I'm going to ask everybody to meet us at the mill pond tomorrow afternoon, and we're going to go fishing. And all you have to do is follow my lead. I've got it, Brother Turtle said. I'll see you tomorrow. So they went on their way. Well, that following afternoon, everyone was down at the mill pond. Well, it was, of course, Brother Rabbit and Brother Turtle, and there's Brother Fox and Brother Bear and Brother Wolf. And there was Miss May and Miss Motes, all gathered there with their fishing poles and tackle and bait. They were just ready to go fishing. So Brother Rabbit started to bait his hook, and he walked over to the edge of the mill pond. He was just getting ready to cast his line when he called out, nobody can go fishing. And he dropped his pole. He said, nobody can go fishing. Nobody can go fishing here in the mill pond. And everybody called out, well, why not? Why, Brother Rabbit said, look down there. And everyone ran to the edge of the mill pond. And Brother Rabbit was pointing in the water. He says, look down there. He said, the moon has dropped in the mill pond, and nobody can go fishing when the moon has dropped in the mill pond. Well, what are you going to do? Brother Turtle said. Well, Brother Rabbit said, I hear tell that if you get a net, you can scoop the moon out of the water. Then we can go fishing. And I know where I can get a net. So that's what he did. Brother Rabbit went off down toward his home to go get a net. So everyone was just standing there looking at the moon in the mill pond. It was just bobbing back and forth in the waves. Well, after a while, Brother Turtle spoke up. He says, you know, folks say that if you can get the moon out of the mill pond with a net, you'll find a treasure underneath. Is that so? Brother Bear said. Oh, that's what folks say, Brother Turtle said. Well, 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 Brother Fox said. Well, after a while, Brother Rabbit came back with that net, and he took off his jacket and he took off his vest and he started to roll up his sleeves because he was going to go in the mill pond and get the moon. But Brother Bear stopped. He says, now, wait a minute, Brother Rabbit. He says, you're not going in that mill pond to get the moon. We'll go in for you. By fine gentlemen like you, we don't want you to get your clothes all wet and dirty. Are you sure? Brother Rabbit said, I don't mind at all. Oh, no, Brother Fox said, let us do it. We'll go in and get the moon out. Suit yourself, Brother Rabbit said. So the 3 of them took that net and they stepped into the mill pond and they dipped it once, no moon. And they dipped it again and no moon. And then Brother Rabbit called out, I think if you go in a few more steps, you might be able to get the moon that time. Well, the 3 of them took that net a few more steps into the mill pond, and then splash! They stepped right into a deep hole that was in the middle of that mill pond, and they came up and they were coughing and spitting out water, and they had snails and pondweed and all kinds of stuff all over them, but no moon. Oh, look at you, Brother Rabbit said. You're going to have to go home and change your clothes. You'll catch your death of cold. Well, the 3 of them climbed out of that mill pond and looked at themselves and how muddy and wet they were. And Brother Bear says, you're right, Brother Rabbit. We need to go home and change. We can't be going around in these muddy clothes. We'll see you later. So the 3 of them started down the road toward home, wet and muddy and very discouraged. And when they were gone, Brother Rabbit walked over to Miss May, and he bowed very courtly. He says, Miss May, would you do me the honor of going to the dance with me tonight at the town hall? I would love to, she said. And then Brother Turtle went up to Miss Motes. He says, Miss Motes, would you do me the honor of going to the dance at the town hall? Oh, I'd love to, she said. So the 4 of them, arm in arm, went down the road toward the town hall and the dance. Meanwhile, Brother Bear, Brother Fox, and Brother Wolf were walking down the road to their home, wet and muddy and so upset. And Brother Bear said, you know, we'll never get home in time and get cleaned up and get dry so we get back to that dance. Oh, I'm so disappointed. Me too, Brother Fox said. We just don't have the time to get that cleaned up right. And they kept on walking. But then Brother Bear stopped. He says, wait a minute. He said, just wait a minute. He said, I think Brother Rabbit tricked us. What do you mean, Brother Fox said? Well, look up in the sky. Look, the moon's up there in the sky the whole time. It wasn't even in the mill pond. He tricked us. I'm afraid you're right, Brother Fox said. Let's just go home.
Okay,
and Brother Bear stopped and he said, well, I'll tell you what. The next time Brother Rabbit tries to tell me that the moon has dropped in the mill pond, I'm going to look up in the sky and see for myself. Now, if someone tries to tell you that the moon has dropped in the mill pond, look up in the sky and see for yourself.
You're saving me. I have to have a story for my 8-year-old when I go visit him in South Carolina. That sounds like a perfect one. You don't mind if I steal it, do you?
Oh, no, it's not mine. It's Joel Chandler Harris.
Terrific. Thank you. Okay, well, staying on the coast, let's have Jamie Blount come forward and tell us his story, and also tell us, did he have any harrowing experiences as part of the hurricane that just took place there? So the floor is yours, Jamie.
Thank you. Thank you. No harrowing experiences to share with you. There was some significant rain in South Carolina, not too far from where I live, but where I am, it was pretty much business as usual. Thank you for asking.
Well, glad to hear it.
Thank you.
Okay, the floor is yours.
That says men's lounge. We don't want to lie down. I was born in 1948. I'm 74 years old right now, and I was born at a good time. You know, the big theaters, the big movie theaters in downtown Baltimore were still in business. When I was a child, when I was an adolescent, even into my early adult years, I could go downtown, buy a ticket, and see a movie on the big screen where there was a balcony and there was a main floor. There was a big candy counter, almost as big as a cafeteria or seemingly so. And I really loved going to see old movies there in those old theaters. Well, I have a story to tell within a story. My father-in-law, my former father-in-law, who was a very fine gentleman, told me that when he was a boy growing up in Northeast Maryland, from time to time, his mother would take them downtown Baltimore to see a movie on the big screen in a big theater. One time she took him to see a movie and she said, now I want you boys to go to the men's room before the movie begins. So she said, you'll find it, it's in the back there. So the boys came back, said, Mom, we couldn't find it. You couldn't find it? What? It's as obvious as nose on your face. So she walked back with them and said, it's right where I told you, it's right there. And they said, Mom, that says men's lounge. We don't want to lie down. Well, of course, when you're a child, 5 or 6 years old, and you see men's lounge, would that occur to you? It's the men's room? Well, certainly not. But back in those days, they had a ladies' lounge and a men's lounge. And each was outfitted with easy chairs and sofas and ashtrays. It was just like being in somebody's living room. Beautiful, as a matter of fact. Well, when I was maybe about 6, 7 years old, my aunt and uncle took my brother and sister and I to see a movie at the Hippodrome Theater in downtown Baltimore. But before we went to the Lexington Market just a few blocks away to get some candy to take into the theater. And as you know, when you sneak in candy from someplace else in a movie theater, you keep it concealed. You don't flaunt it. You don't show it because it might be taken away from you. So at Lexington Market, I went to Constance spelled with a K, and I've got some of this delicious taffy. It was a hard taffy that the man who worked there had to take a hammer and hammer away at that taffy to break it apart, so it would give me a quarter pound's worth of taffy. We saw a movie there. I forget what it was, but it was a science fiction movie. It was about the sky being on fire and some naval submarine shot an atomic bomb into the sky to put the fire out, and everybody lived happily ever after. course, it was hard to believe, but that's what the story was about. Many years after that, my friend Barbara invited me to go with her to the Hippodrome Theater, where I'd seen that movie many years before. The Hippodrome was no longer a theater for movies. It had been converted to a theater for plays. And ironically, the theater had been a vaudeville theater before it became a movie theater. So it went from vaudeville to movie theater to theater. And now I think it's out of business. At least I hope it's not, but I think it is. Anyway, first stop, we went to the candy counter at Lexington Market, and I bought some candy to sneak into the theater that I could enjoy while I was watching the show, the play. Constant was still there, but it changed a great deal, and it didn't have those big mouths of taffy, but I got a bag of candy to sneak into the movie theater. It always tastes better when you sneak it in. And we saw the play monologue, actually, Golda. Anybody ever seen Golda before? Probably not. Well, Golda Meir, sound familiar? The fourth prime minister of Israel. It was a monologue starring Valerie Parker, you know, the lady who played Rhoda in that TV series years ago. Well, she played a very, very, very different part. She played Golda Meir in her senior years when she was prime minister of Israel. And it was a monologue. It was a 2-act monologue, as I recall, and very well done. I remember watching this and just imagining how an actress could go from Rhoda, this trendy, chic, uptown socialite in the sitcom, to Golda Meir, this arthritic, elderly woman, prime minister of Israel, sitting there in very matronly clothes and very matronly shoes, and she had a shawl around her shoulders. But she played that part so well. I just couldn't believe I was watching the same actress play that part. Much of it was about the time when Golda Meir was the prime minister of Israel, when Israel was at war with its neighbors. And she talked about how very hard it was to send young men to their death to defend the country. That was one of the hardest things she ever had to do, according to what she said in this monologue. But I remember something else that's sort of related and sort of unrelated to this. The rector of the church I went to in Baltimore, a gentleman by the name of Bob Patterson, went to Israel on his sabbatical. Well, Bob happened to be very, very good friends with a rabbi in town. In fact, I think Bob and this rabbi were probably the closest to friends anybody could possibly find. Well, before Bob departed for Israel for his sabbatical, he asked his rabbi friend if he could please arrange for an interview with Golda Meir while he was there. Well, the rabbi said, well, Bob, I can't promise that. That's a pretty big request. I'll try as best I can, but I can't promise anything. Let's see what happens. Well, Bob went to Israel, and a few days before he was ready to leave, he got a telephone call that Golda Meir was available for an interview at a certain time on a certain day. That's all the time she had available. Take it or leave it. So Bob went to visit Golda Meir. And while he was there, he had a tape recorder with him and asked her if she would be good enough to record something to the people in the church that we would enjoy listening to. So I remember that Sunday, 2 or 3 Sundays after Bob got back from Israel, and he played that tape recording from the pulpit in the church. And I remember Golda Meir saying, we want peace in Israel. We want peace with our neighbors. We want peace within Israel. What we long for above all else is peace. And she said this several times. I'll never forget that. It was said so convincingly and so strongly, despite the fact that she was an elderly woman not too far away from her own death. When I watched play Golda in the Hippodrome Theater in Baltimore with my friend Barbara, toward the end of the play, Golda Meir said over and over how much she longed for peace, peace within Israel, peace among the neighbors of Israel. That was the thing she wanted more than anything else in the world, was peace. Well, I was so moved by that, it literally brought me to tears. I had actually heard Golda Meir say very much the same thing in my church a few years before. And there I was sitting in the Hippodrome Theater being entertained in this monologue starring Valerie Parker playing the part of Golda Meir and hearing the same thing, almost the same words, and almost the same voice. The voice that I heard in the theater was virtually identical to the verse I heard on that tape recording in church years before. Was that a coincidence? I don't think so. I think it was an actress who studied Golda Meir, the woman, very, very closely, and was able to pretty much replicate the Golda Meir that we had known as a politician for many, many years over here. And here she was, an immigrant from Russia who went to America, who taught public school in Milwaukee, and then later became the prime minister of Israel, and saying over and over what she wanted above all else was peace. Peace in Israel, peace with the neighbors of Israel. Did her dream come true? Well, I don't know. I don't know how to answer that. But whatever I believe in my heart of hearts, that what Golda Meir wanted above all else was peace. End of story.
Wonderful, Jamie. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
You're going to hate me for this, but I can't resist it. That was certainly a golden moment for your friend.
Certainly was.
Wonderful. Next, we have Elizabeth Beamon, who is a practitioner of what I consider to be the most important, or one of the most important careers that one can have. I had a great-grandmother who taught once in a one-room school, and she loved books. And later on, when I was old enough to understand what she was saying, she said to me, you know, when you teach someone how to read, they'll never be alone for the rest of their lives. And she had gone so far as when I was born. I mean, I was in a bassinet shortly after I was born. She put a book in there for a newborn called Danny the Dragon. Now, I know that she thought I was a superior child, but I could not read at birth. It took me a while after that. But we're so happy that Elizabeth's with us tonight. Elizabeth has taught many people how to love and appreciate stories, and we're looking forward to the story she's going to tell us this evening. The floor is yours, Elizabeth.
Thank you. Well, it's so fun to be here on an October evening. We've had some cooler weather, and we're grateful for that. I am going to tell you about a story I heard from an opportunistic friend, Emcee. Emcee was very opportunistic. He was walking one day down a very beautiful area of the woods, very like where Sue and Chuck are right now, with the aspens were blowing in the wind and it was golden. And he was thinking to himself, what a beautiful day this is today. And as he walked, he just made this funny sound. Bloop, 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 bloop. And as he walked and the wind blew lightly, gently, and the aspens wiggled, it was just a beautiful thing. He was breathing in that wonderful mountain air when all of a sudden he smelled food. And I told you he's very opportunistic. So he just sped up just a little bit. Bloop, 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 bloop. And he went around the corner and he noticed way down the way there was a little bit of smoke. And that's what he had smelled. What was cooking that smelled so delightful? So he just sped up just a little bit more. Bloop, 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 bloop. And when he got to that smoke, it was underneath a pot. And in the pot it had a lid, and there was a wonderful aroma coming out of that pot. And he wanted to look in that pot, but he noticed to the side there was a little home, and the little home was Brother Snake's home. So he decided to just peek into the pot. So he lifted the lid, and this wonderful aroma of beans came out. And at the same moment, Brother Snake came out of his home. Anansi, get away from my pot. I was just smelling the wonderful aroma. May I stir them? You may, but you may not have even one bean. Oh, oh, oh. And he started to stir the beans, and he started to drool. I didn't know that my friend could drool like that, but he drooled because he wanted to taste the beans. And he said, Brother Snake, there are so many beans. Why can't I have 3? No, I'm having a party tonight. I'm expecting people to show up pretty soon. And I want, bring. Brother Snake's telephone was in the house. It was before cell phones. He had a landline. So he had to go back into the house to answer the phone. Bling. Brother Snake said, Anansi, stay away from my beans. I have to answer the phone. And with that, he slithered back in. Hello? Yes, are you going to come tonight? Oh, I'm so happy. Yes, bring your friends. We have lots of beans. He kept talking and talking. Well, Nancy was drooling. He was thinking, what? 3 beans. He'll never miss 3 beans. And with that, my opportunistic friend took off his hat. He scooped up 3 beans, put them in the hat, put the hat on, and with lickety split, went down the road, bloop, 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 went around the corner and took off the hat and blew on the beans. And then he felt his head. And he was bald. He had burned off all his little fuzzy stuff of his little spider head. So he told me, as he told me this story, he said, Elizabeth, I burned off the fuzzies on my head, but it was worth it. Those beans were delicious. Thank you.
Everything's a trade-off, and that sounds like a good one. Thank you very much, Elizabeth.
You're welcome.
Now we're going to have one of our co-hosts who is going to, I believe, entertain us with a folktale, Karen Archer. Karen?
Well, I'm going to borrow a bit from Judi and a little bit from Gary.
Wow.
And I'm going to talk about fall time, October, and the moon. And then we know that the moon kind of rules the crop planting and the harvesting. And the Native Americans know how powerful the moon is. They also know that sometimes the moon can be made angry. Well, there were 2 friends, best friends, the chief's son and the hunter's son. And they spent every minute they could together. And one of their favorite places to go was on the hillside above their village. They could sit up there and look down on their village. And they loved that time together. And you know how sometimes when the moon comes up before the sun has fully set, and there's still light in the sky and the moon looks kind of white and it's hard to see. Well, the boys were sitting on their favorite spot on the hill one evening, and the hunter's son looked up in the sky And he said, "Oh my, how pale and weak the moon looks tonight." The chief's son said, "No, don't say anything to make the moon angry." But it was too late. There was a loud crashing sound and everything went dark. When the chief's son opened his eyes and everything cleared out, he looked around and his friend, the hunter's son, was not there. He knew right away what happened. The moon took his friend, the hunter's son. Well, he didn't know what to do. There wasn't much he could do, but he did have his bow and arrows. And he began to shoot arrows up in the sky toward the moon. It was the only thing he could think to do. He shot all of his arrows up into the sky, but of course, nothing happened. Nothing saved his friend, the hunter's son. All of this made him very tired, and he fell into a heap down on the ground and fell asleep. When he woke, he saw in front of him a ladder made of arrows, and the ladder went all the way up into the sky. He began to climb that ladder up, 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 above the trees, up to the clouds, above the clouds, all the way to the top of the sky. When he got to the top, of course, he was quite tired. And he laid down. He was just going to lay his head down for a minute, take a nap. Well, he did that. And then all of a sudden, he felt someone shaking his shoulder and saying, "Wake up, wake up." He opened his eyes and he saw in front of him a young girl about his age. And she says, "Wake up. We have been waiting for you. We heard your arrows hitting our house, my grandmother's house, and we knew you were coming to save your friend. And we have been waiting for you. Come with me to my grandmother's house." So they ran to the grandmother's house, and the grandmother said, "Yes, the moon has taken your friend captive, and he is tied up over at the moon's house. I can help you rescue your friend, but first I want to give you something." And so she gave to the chief's son 3 things: a spruce cone, a rose branch, and a rock. He took these 3 things and he ran straightway over to the moon's house to rescue his friend. He saw his friend, the hunter's son, inside the moon's house, and the moon wasn't around. So he went in very quickly and untied his friend. And he says, "We will run to safety, but first I must go up on the roof." And so the chief's son went up on the roof, took out the spruce cone, and put it in the chimney of the moon's house. Well, when the wind started blowing through the spruce cone, it set up a real whistling sound. And this was distracting to the moon. The moon went up on the roof to find out what all that noise was about. And while the moon was doing that, the 2 boys ran for the safety of the grandmother's house. Well, it didn't take very long for the moon to figure out what was going on and notice that the hunter's son was no longer in the moon's house. The moon started chasing after the 2 boys. The moon had a couple of advantages. One, very large, and the other, round. This meant the moon could move much more quickly than the 2 boys could, and the moon was gaining on them very quickly. They went along a little bit further, and then the chief's son stopped, and he turned in the path, and he picked up the rose branch and he threw it down onto the path. Immediately, it blew up into a huge bramble bush, and the moon rolled right into the bramble bush with all the thorns in it. Well, that gave the boys enough time to get another head start on the moon. But now, boy, oh boy, the moon was sure mad. And the moon started coming after them even faster and yelling, "Don't you trick the moon. I'll make you pay for tricking me." And was gaining on them very quickly. Well, the chief's son had one more thing. He had that rock. He went a ways on the path and stopped and turned, and he threw that rock down on the path as hard as he could. And that rock grew up into a giant mountain, and the moon crashed right into the mountain. And the moon couldn't get around the mountain, it was too big. That gave the boys enough time to get to the safety of the grandmother's house. Of course, they wanted to go home right away, but the grandmother was wise. And she said, "Why don't you rest for a minute? Sit down here and think about your hill above the village that you love so much. Imagine if you were back on that hill." And the boys' eyes started getting very heavy, and they were sleepy, and they did doze off. And when they woke, they were on the hill above their village. They were back home, and they ran back down to the village. Everyone was so happy to see them. They had been afraid that they weren't going to come back, and they welcomed them back. They had a feast and a big celebration to help celebrate the boys coming back. The boys remained friends for many, many years. And the two friends, whenever they went up on the hill above their village, they looked up into the sky. And they looked for the grandmother's house and gave thanks for the grandmother who saved them from the angry moon. And sometimes when you look up in the sky, look to see if you see a little star off to the side next to the moon. That is the grandmother's house.
Wonderful. I've seen that star and I never knew what it was. So now it'll be a whole different dimension every time I look at it.
Nice, Karen, nice.
Thank you so much, Karen. And now, folks, we have from across the sea, we are fortunate enough that our Irish storyteller came back to us after a wonderful summer in Western Ireland, after sending us some of the most beautiful pictures I've ever seen of Ireland, and has brought a fresh story back with her. So without further ado, Jane McDaniel, you have...
I've got a short story. It's a really, really old one. There's a lake in Sligo, in the county of Sligo, which is in the northwest of Ireland. And it's been written about, sung about. It's called the Lake Isle of Innisfree. W.B. Yeats wrote a very famous poem about it. And I learned that as a child, and it was called I Will Arise and Go Now to Innisfree. And a small cabin built there of clay and wattles made. 9 bean rows will I have there, and a hive for the honey bee, and live alone in the bee-loud glade. And I shall have some peace there, for peace comes dropping slow. Dropping from the vales of the morning to where the cricket sings, their midnights all a glimmer, and noon a purple glow, and evening full of the linnet's wings. That is not an old lake that just exists since ancient Celtic times. And the story of it is, there was a girl called Gela. She was the daughter of Éan Moore, who was the chieftain in that area. And she was beautiful. but she was not interested in men, not interested in her father marrying her off. And the young men came to their dún up there in Sligo, which name comes from Skellig, which means the place of the mussels, the place of the oyster shells, of the cockle shells, because at one time that was all covered in water. And 200,000 tons of mussel shells have been found up there. The people used to carry the mussels and the oysters up from the sea, up to where the river Inish ran, and eat them there. And they've been found there, the mussels, the shells everywhere. But she lived up there with her father and her 8 sisters in a little curve of the river in the valley, where it was protected, and he was the chieftain. And being the chieftain, he had standing, and she had standing too, because he was her father. So the men came, and she wasn't interested. And then there was one older one who was definitely interested in her. He was an old soldier. Ramona was his name. He came. She turned him down. She had her eyes on a young man who was on the way to becoming a SASA, a wise man. And he would sing in the woods when she was around, because she was interested in flowers and plants and making potions and medicine, natural medicine. And one day he was in the woods singing and making bird calls, and he could hear her going through the underbrush. And as he came closer, he made the sound of a nightingale, because it was evening. And she heard him, and she stood and waited. And soon he came out of the woods, and he came over to her, and his eyes shone, because he had so seldom a chance to be with her alone. And as they sat there together, Ramona broke out of the underbrush and came at him. And with one fell swoop of his sword, he killed that young man. And she sat there with his head in her lap and cried and cried and cried. Is scéal bónach brónach a té. This is a sad story. Her handmaidens were around in the woods, not close by, but they heard her crying. And when they came, they saw her prostrate with his head and his eyes wide open, a look of surprise on his face. And she had died of a broken heart. They looked for who had done that dirty deed, and it had been Ramona. They knew that he was looking for her, and they found him deep in the valley where he had thrown himself on his sword, because he had realized that with that deed that his future was gone. And she cried and cried before she died, and her tears swept down the hill and swept into the valley and made a lake, the Innisfree. And her father, when they brought her body home, he said, put her in the river. And they put her in the river, and they covered her up with heather and flowers and everything they could gather there in the woods, and watched as her body floated gradually down to the lake. And there it stood. And birds came to that little island, which was her body, and laid twigs in her lap, and laid moss, and laid everything they could gather to make nests. And they built their nests on her body. And very soon there was an island. And that is the island that W.B. Yeats talks about. And many, many poets have talked about when they talk about that place where peace comes dropping slow.
Whoa, what a beautiful, beautiful story.
The Irish have it.
There you go. And that Ramon, oh boy, what a bad guy.
Yes.
Killing young love like that. Well, Jane, thank you so much. And once
Thank you.
again, we're so glad to have you back on this side of the Atlantic. And we hope you're going to stay at least until next summer, when you probably will go back to Ireland again.
Writing my report right now. I have to go to England at the end of the week because my brother is dying.
Oh, we're
I'm
sorry
going
to
on
hear.
Saturday, but I will be back in a week's time.
Well, if the king asks about me, tell him I'm doing all right.
I
Okay?
will.
Well, what a wonderful, you've got the floor, and you're my favorite young storyteller, so take it away, Nathan.
Thank you, John. It was a dark night, and a little boy was walking home. He was running pretty late. It was pretty late, so he was hurrying as fast as he could. But then he saw a young girl standing in the street. The boy walked up to her and he asked, "Excuse me, can you tell me what time it is, please?" The girl held up her wristwatch and turned on the light. "Why, it is 8 o'clock," she said. You shouldn't be out running this late." And then she grinned at him. But her teeth were as long as nails. When the boy saw the teeth, he ran for his life. But soon he met another girl. "Oh, my dear young man, why are you running?" she asked him. "I just met a girl with teeth as long as nails," said the boy. "It scared me to death." But the girl laughed. "Oh, she's jealous. My teeth are much longer than that. Have a look at these," she said, and she grinned at the boy. And this girl's teeth were as long as pencils. When the boy saw her teeth, he ran. He took off running again. He ran and ran and ran until he met yet another girl. "Whoa, slow down, young man," she said. "What's all the hurry?" "I just saw a girl with teeth as long as nails and another girl with teeth as long as pencils," said the boy, desperately gasping for breath. But the girl only said, "That's nothing. Have you ever seen teeth this long?" And she grinned from ear to ear. And this girl's teeth were as long as steak knives. The boy took one look and he ran all the way home. And he ran and ran and ran until he was safe at home with the door locked. And that's my story.
Aha, well, he escaped behind closed walls just in time. Thank you, Nathan. I'm glad that you're joining us this evening.
You're welcome. And that was the perfect story for Halloween.
Absolutely, and it's not too far away. Well, thank you again. Let me sneak in my little storytelling tip, and it might prove useful as you construct your own stories. People ask me, particularly my grandchildren, great-grandchildren from time to time, how do you pick something? Nothing exciting happens to me. How do you pick something to tell a story about? And I said, well, there are things happening all the time that make for interesting stories, and you just have to look around you. Okay, let me give you an example. Okay, Johnny got $1 from his father and immediately took the dollar, walked down the street, and went to the ice cream shop at the end of his block, bought an ice cream cone, and sat there and began to eat it. Okay. Well, they looked at me and said, okay, but that's probably the dullest story I've ever heard. And I said, well, let's look at it another way. Okay, let's, instead of starting our story in a linear form where it starts in the beginning, goes to the middle, and goes to the end, let's jump into the middle of the story. And we'll start out now. Johnny just woke up and it was very, very cold, and he realized that he was laying on damp dirt in a very dark place, and he could feel his arms being wrapped in chains behind him. And he didn't know how he got there. What had happened? The last thing he remembered was he was on his way to the ice cream store to spend the $1 on a scoop of ice cream that his father had given him. Okay. Which one makes you want the storyteller to continue with the story? Okay. The first one goes to the middle or maybe even the end of Johnny's story. But we're dying to know how a simple act like walking to the store to get an ice cream cone ended up with poor Johnny in so much trouble. We could also have the story starting with Johnny being just elected to the presidency of the United States. And yet, when we continue the story, he's only 5 years old. He's a little boy in kindergarten in some place. But by adjusting the various ways, you can hook your reader or your listener, more importantly, into your story and make very commonplace events a source of your own storytelling. Well, thank you all again for joining us this evening. We really appreciate our listeners who come, and there is no storytelling without listeners. And also, we hope to invite you all back again, first Wednesday in November, and hope that you have a wonderful Halloween between then and maybe a few lingering Halloween stories when we see you again in November. Have a good evening. Good night.
Yeah, good night and happy Halloween, everyone.
Thank you, John. Thank you.